Welcome to the Life Unlimited podcast with Larry Heller. You deserve complete financial advice so you can confidently live your life your way, for life. Now, let's get into this week's podcast episode.
Hello and welcome to another Life Unlimited podcast with your host, Larry Heller. Today, we're going to be talking about estate planning for women with Allison Dolzani. Now, she is a partner with Julie Kessler, LLP, and specializes in estate planning, estate administration, and surrogates court practice. She represents both domestic and international clients, including multi-generational families, in advanced estate planning, focus on strategies to minimize the impact of gift, estate, generation skipping transfer, and income taxes. All right, Larry, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Matt. Allison, thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast. And we're going to talk about estate planning for women. So why don't we kind of jump right into it, Allison? And why don't you let us know, and the audience know, some of the unique considerations that women face when it comes to estate planning?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for having me. So a lot of times when women come to my office, it's women who maybe are going through a divorce, women who are widowed, and we can kind of get into their unique planning needs. But a lot of times, women come in, they think that they don't have an estate. I tell everyone, if you have minor children, you have planning needs. So women, especially, thinking about their minor kids, it's really, really important that they name guardians on their wills. It's a really big issue that needs to be taken care of.
So, just talking about that. So if someone's divorced, do they have to name their ex-spouse as the guardian on their wills? How does that work?
Yeah, so good question. Yes, the natural parent is the by law guardian. So if their ex is the natural parent and there's not any sort of custody agreement otherwise, they would that would be the natural guardian in succession. However, they should also name a backup in case that ex predeceases the client. And that's where guardianship issues could get really tricky, especially if the spouses are divorced. Who is going to be the successor to each other? And that could cause a battle in the courts. So having each spouse name a successor guardian gives the court a better guideline as to what the parent wanted.
And do most custody agreements address this, or is this something that they don't address and that's why they need to speak to an estate attorney?
It depends, that might be, but also it should really be addressed in the will. Now, the will is not binding. Just because you named, your best friend as the guardian, that best friend will still have to petition the court to become the guardian. So I always make that clear as well. It's not automatic. That person still has to go through that proceeding, but the court seeing that person's last will and testament saying, oh, okay, this is what the parent wanted, it holds great weight.
And what are some of the other unique considerations that women should address when it comes to estate planning?
Yeah, so, a lot of times it comes down to what their own assets are. Maybe they have, separate from the spouse, maybe they have inherited assets that they are getting from their own family. Whether they're married or not, that should be dealt with in their estate planning documents. A lot of times, a couple could be happily married, but I've seen it a few times where woman comes in, she has a nest egg from her parents, and the goal is, while they love the other spouse, they really want to keep it in the family line. So that should be carved out in her own estate planning documents. A lot of other times too.
Just a point on that. Sorry to interrupt there.
Yeah.
So we're in New York. So we're talking about New York law. So from a divorce standpoint, if the assets remain in her name, if they would ever to get divorced, that would be still remain her property.
Right.
So correct. So I just want to kind of clarify that's what you were talking about. So that's a great, a great thought there, especially we have some women whose parents own businesses and they're getting married. Forget about prenuptial is a whole nother conversation, but just thinking about some of the planning that's important either before you get married or going forward. So I just kind of want to bring that up.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's important too, while if to be mindful even pre-marriage, during marriage and whatnot, if they are getting separate assets from the family or whatnot, keep it in your individual name. Do not commingle, because that is a really you're allowing the other spouse to go after that in the event of divorce or even death. So whether you keep it in a segregated account, never a joint account, kind of earmark it separately. That's a good planning tool.
So that's kind of pre-matter, but we were talking a little bit about divorce and about widows. So what are kind of some of the other planning opportunities or planning things someone should think about if going through a divorce or or unfortunately becoming a widow?
Yeah, so updating your estate planning documents. If you're going through a divorce or you were widowed, your spouse might be on those documents. So it's always good just to update them to your current situation. I always tell people to come see their estate planning attorney at every major life event: birth of a child, marriage, buying a home, starting a business, divorce, retirement. So for women, it's also important too, especially if they weren't head of household, managing all of the finances. This is now a good time to come together with me and maybe their financial advisor as well, as to, okay, what are the assets? What, in the context of divorce, maybe they're in the divorce agreement, you're getting an X amount of money. If you are a widow, you inherited X amount from your spouse. You want to make sure that is all organized in your estate plan, and then also in your financial plan going forward.
Right. And you mentioned estate planning documents. So why don't you address some of the other important documents, especially if someone's going through a divorce or becoming a widow, that should be looked at and may possibly be revised?
So a lot of people are very familiar with wills, last will and testament, and while you are married, and a lot of assets are joint, that might be fine. But if you're going through a divorce or becoming widowed when you're the single person, then everything is in your name. And what I'm recommending now instead of wills are revocable living trusts. I like to call them the will 2.0. They take the place of a will because they avoid the probate proceeding that has to happen in the court at death. So normally your named executor will have to petition the court, name your next of kin, either serve them with a citation or have them sign off on a waiver. And between death and getting that probate decree, it could be several months. It's where that really matters is, what if the person had minor children, or there's a lot of bills? No one can touch those probate assets until an executor or fiduciary is appointed. So especially for single women who maybe have the minor children or are widowed, it's really important, I think, to streamline that process and then make it easier for the family to administer their estate by doing a revocable trust instead of a will. And just the revocable trust looks just like a will. It says, upon my death, my assets will go here, here, and there.
Great point. And there's other documents too that are important, especially now if you're now single, correct?
Exactly. So you want to have an updated healthcare proxy that's naming an agent who would make healthcare decisions on your behalf if you were incapacitated. I always recommend to name a primary and a successor. And then a power of attorney that's really signature authority, especially if you are single. It's really good to give a very trusted person a power of attorney who could, speak to the bank on your behalf if you're unable to do so, or sign your name on something again if you're maybe incapacitated or unable to do so. It's a lot of burden to be a single person, maybe running a household now. So having those documents in place that you could at least know someone's there to take that over for you in the event of an emergency is really important to have.
Right. So obviously, if you're going through a divorce, you probably don't want your ex-spouse named in both those things. If you became a widow, you may not have somebody at all named in that. So it's really important that you go ahead and get those documents. People think, oh, it's just a will and I don't have to worry about that. But these documents are sometimes even more critical than wills.
Exactly. That I call those the foundational documents. I mean, they really apply to your everyday life and give you peace of mind. Just in the context of what to put in your documents when you're going through a divorce or widowed, at a high level, it's also important too that if you are getting divorced, for example, in your divorce agreement, there might be certain estate obligations, maintaining life insurance for your ex or things like that. And you want to make sure that your will or revocable trust is up to date in order to make sure you're not in violation of the divorce agreement. And, for if you're a widow as well, maybe your spouse set up a trust for your benefit. So that all has to be incorporated into your new plan.
Yeah, so one of the things that we see sometimes going through widow divorce, and they've gone to the estate attorney, and they've got all these new documents and everything is great. And they said, oh, everything's good. I have my will. And we asked to look at their beneficiaries on their accounts. And lo and behold, sometimes they've left their ex-spouse as their beneficiary on that because they didn't realize that. Or, and this could be just as important now, they've named their minor child as their beneficiary. And some of these accounts, their 401ks and their IRAs, could be extremely, extremely large. So, one of the things that we've kind of talk about is, how do you get around naming a minor beneficiary on that? But just making sure that you change those is so important.
Absolutely. So when someone's coming in, maybe they're going through a divorce and or widowhood, and they come to me for all new documents, I make sure to look at everything because it's a good exercise for them, what accounts they have. And they say, are there beneficiaries on that account? It is a big, no to name a minor child on your retirement assets or anything else, because then essentially the guardian of your child will have to be on the bank account with the surrogate's court until they're 18. So what I always do is, either if they're doing a will or they're doing a revocable trust, establish a trust upon your passing for the benefit of your minor child, whether that's till a certain age. I like to, instead of saying 18, maybe 25, 30, delay it a little bit. And then you would name that trust as the beneficiary of the retirement assets or other TOD accounts.
Right. It gets a little bit more complicated now with the new inherited IRA rules if you want to kind of go past 21, because now you have to distribute within 10 years. So if you do delay it to 30, you could be having lose some planning opportunities when it comes to that. But then again, that's a whole nother podcast that we can talk about.
Exactly.
Well, why don't we kind of get back to women? So, how does estate planning contribute to, the women's financial independence and possibly long-term security?
Yeah, so I think, when I like to speak with women, I try to take a really personable approach, because they're coming off of major life events, usually in context of divorce or death. And I believe once they have their estate planning documents in order, it's kind of like a sigh of relief. I've had clients tell me a lot of times that it's a weight lifted off their shoulder. Once they go through the exercise with me of organizing their finances, their agents, and then their estate planning documents, I think it gives them greater confidence to say, I could be financially independent. I know these are my assets. I have a plan. I have my advisors. I can handle this. So I think it's like, this is where it starts. And then they always have something that they could refer back to. And I always say, always update. I'll call them every so often to make changes, but I think this gives them a good foot forward.
Yes, and it kind of a transition into the next phase, whatever life that will now be. So can you share some advice on how women can leave a meaningful legacy for future generations?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I like to do often is to ask the client what their goals are. A lot of times, they think, oh, it's just to, make sure I have guardians for my children, which are very important. But also, if they're charitably inclined, I either set them up with the right advisors to do something, currently during their lifetime, or maybe I could create a scholarship, a bequest for a scholarship under their documents upon their passing. So, and then that could be, dedicated to my late spouse, or for my children and things like that. I think it's very important, while I don't want them to get too far in the weeds with tangibles, I always like to suggest to clients to maybe think, oh, do I want to leave personal jewelry to certain people? And then this doesn't go with the estate planning documents because it's not enforceable in New York. But I think writing a separate letter of wishes, maybe in your own handwriting, as to why maybe you provided for certain bequests, I think helped the family a lot. And I know for a lot of children I've spoken to when their parents have passed, like saying, I have something in mom's handwriting that says, this is why I wanted to leave you, grandma's locket. It is really nice. Even, the smallest kind of details go a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is, if you have a estate now where you were married, you may be able to do some planning to kind of double your estate taxes. That kind of now in half, right?
Exactly. So the importance of doing your estate planning, now with taking advantage of certain tax elections is also really important in New York, especially if you're the surviving spouse. So in the context of being a widow, now you might have, depending upon the predeceased spouse's estate, you might have all the assets in your estate. So that's another reason why widows should really come and do their estate planning, because now they might be have 100% of the bucket. And regardless of, estate taxes, you want to make sure that you're treating your family the way you want to under your documents. But also in New York, there are certain tax thresholds that you need to be wary of if you are kind of approaching that $7 million range, where you don't want New York State Department of Tax to necessarily be a beneficiary before your kids.
Right. And I think a lot of people don't realize that that's a cliff tax. So if you're over the cliff, it's taxed from $1. It's not assets from 7 million and above. So it could be a pretty hefty number. So you do want to speak to someone like Allison and make sure that you have that proper planning in place.
Exactly.
So finally, I think we might have touched upon this, but is there any other estate planning items that may differ for a single or a widowed woman compared to those with partners?
A lot of it's pretty similar. But again, I think that when you're single, it's either it's a little trickier, because also when you're going back just to estate taxes real quick on the federal level, there's a lot more planning you could do, because you could use your spouse's estate tax credits also in your planning. When you're a single person, you're only working with one estate tax exemption. So you want to be really mindful if you are in that arena where you could potentially be facing estate tax issues. And then also, just making sure, especially when you're a single person, that you update regularly, because things change, the laws change, and even on the documents like the healthcare proxy and power of attorney, you might have named your best friend, but now she has moved across the country. So having those documents up to date are just really, really important when you're just the sole head of household.
Yeah. Any final thoughts that you want to let our audience know today, Allison?
Yeah, I just think sometimes with estate planning, it could be a little bit of a taboo subject. You're dealing with family dynamics, your own mortality, so it could be hard to get people to come through the door. But again, I like to really just treat everyone as very personable, and just have them, feel better that they check this off their to-do list. I always check in with them, and it's a continual relationship as your life develops. So should your estate planning. So it doesn't hurt to have that initial conversation in order to feel a lot more organized at the end.
Absolutely. Allison, thanks so much for joining us today. A lot of good information for everyone out there. And if they need to, someone wants to contact you, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
So either by the telephone or by email. I could I normally respond to both very, very quickly. And then I think you have that contact
So
information.
yeah, why don't you let the audience know what's the email and the phone number?
Perfect. So, so I have two offices, but my telephone number is for my Manhattan line. It could reach me anywhere. So that's 212-687-1466. And then my email is adolzani, ADOLZANI @jandklaw.com.
Great. Thank you so much again for joining us today, Allison.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
One of the fun things about being the fly on the wall on this podcast is Allison was saying a whole bunch of things that I've heard Larry say so many times on the podcast about the individual care and the level of care that he provides and everybody at Heller Wealth Management provides to their clients, especially dealing with these very sensitive subjects. You know, Allison, you're absolutely right. We're talking about tough stuff here, and making sure that you're sitting down with somebody who can truly have that conversation and is comfortable in those emotions make a really big difference. And for our listeners, this is one of those episodes. It's a fantastic episode for you to share. If you have women in your life, which you probably do, this is a great episode to go ahead and share with them and saying, hey, look, mom, aunt, uncle, daughter, sister, friend, this is something I think you should pay attention to, because what they talked about is what you're going through too. And we'll make sure that we have Allison's contact information in the show notes. And if you want to know more about Heller Wealth Management, go to hellerwealthmanagement.com. So for Larry and Allison, this is Matt Halloran, and we'll see you on the other side of the mic very soon.